You need to know one thing about me. I love Halloween more than any other day of the year. It is the only day when I can finally feel like myself, raise the dead with my magic, and nobody bats an eye. Nice try, buddy. You stay dead. And speaking of raising the dead, I exhumed a very interesting series from the past. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gargoyle's Quest Trilogy. That's right, for my Halloween special, we will be talking about a whole series tonight. At their hearts, all three games are side-scrollers with RPG elements blended in. On the one hand, you go through level after level, jump, fight, and destroy a boss at the end. But there's also an overworld for you to explore. And of course, all of this was held together by a story. Granted, these stories are always very rudimentary, but they did the job just fine. But before we can talk about these games, we have to take a look at another game that is deeply connected with this series. Back in 1988, when arcades were still a thing, Capcom released Ghouls and Ghosts, a side-scrolling platformer and serious quarter-muncher. Oh sorry, I got the name wrong. It's Ghosts and Goblins. See, stupid me was thinking about the Super Nintendo port. You would assume the role of Knight Arthur, who has to rescue his love interest Princess Prin from the clutches of evil. With trusty throwable weapons, you would fight through the levels until you reach the King of Evil himself, slay him, and bring the princess back home. And if it weren't for this little red nuisance here, the player might have succeeded. But this monster was the first skill check and quarterbuster of the game. The Red Irregular, as he was called, could fly, had a very irritating movement pattern, and would follow the player through the level until he was finally struck down. If that sounds hard, then imagine beating him while you can only take 2 hits tops before you lose a life. This gargoyle single-handedly wiped out millions of virtual lives and in turn made Capcom a lot of money from quarters alone. And somewhere along the line, the infamy of the Red Irregular must have reached the ears of Capcom execs, who then decided to honor his commitment to the cause by elevating him from a mere villain to a protagonist and bestowing the name Firebrand upon him. And so it happened. The first part of the series came out in 1990 for the Game Boy. Its title, Red Irregular Maikamura Gaiden, which translates to Red Irregular Demon Village Side Story. But that was too long a title, so the localization simply changed it to Gargoyle's Quest. Interestingly enough, Gargoyle's Quest was also one of the first titles you could buy for the newly released handheld console, the Game Boy. This, and the kick-ass gameplay, certainly helped in establishing a loving community. Yes, even though there is so much wrong with the cover art. Whoever made this probably looked at the Game Boy screen and thought, okay, so the main character is green and he looks cute, well that translates to Robin Williams for me. And those bedsheets enemies, yeah, we take them too, but let's give him a little different color for, reasons. As the game implies, it was one of the first games I played that flipped the table on the good-bad mentality of things. The player would not control a hero, but not an evil mastermind either. The game couldn't possibly be about him fighting off knights and capturing princesses for his harem. No, our new guy needed to be a good guy, while also staying a bad guy. And thus the Ghoul realm was created. Entirely inhabited by monsters, zombies, and abominations, but none of them were mindless. In fact, they built towns you can visit, each of them has a ruler as well, and you can talk to the inhabitants and they would give you a little bit of info or just chat. From a world-building perspective, this was the way to go. Living in a world of demons enabled Firebrand to be seen as a sympathetic hero by his environment and in extension by the player. And I have to be honest, for a Game Boy title, this still looks great. The overworld is a bit barren, true, but the levels are beautiful. You can see a different background for every level, the tiles you step on are detailed and give every dungeon a unique look. And the enemy design isn't bad either. Plus, the designers gave each monster a border so they really stand out from the background and can't be missed. The towns you visit were pretty impressive for the time, with all the ghouls buzzing around and different houses you could enter, but nowadays I would call it functional. In hindsight, I am missing the macabre vibe I get when I enter one of the levels. The towns look too human-like for me. And with the world fleshed out, it's time to talk about the story, which is presented in scroll text. But reading all that is boring, so here's the abridged version. Once, the Ghoul realm was under attack by an army from another dimension. The attackers almost won. But when everything seemed lost, a red fire swept over the entirety of the realm and annihilated the whole invading army. Several hundred years have passed since then, and the very same army that was beaten once is about to return. As the game starts, the war against the Ghoul realm is already in full force. as is evident by the fact that Firebrand gets visited by 3 ghouls who can spew out exactly one sentence each before they die right in front of him. Would be a shame if one of them messed up his lines. Firebrand, have you heard about Raid Shadow Legend? You know what, maybe it's better that way. Anyway, every soldier is needed to fend off the attackers, and as soon as you leave the house, you plunge right into the action. Firebrand can attack enemies by shouting fireballs at them, he can jump, hover for a short period of time, and claw into walls to climb. And here you can already see one of the unique features the game has: verticality. Most side-scrollers really just let you walk from side to side, but Firebrand's moveset enables him to scale the landscape, which in turn makes for interesting level design choices. Traps and enemies are not just bound to the floor and ceiling anymore, they can be everywhere. Spikes can come out of the floor or the walls, making it hard for the player to ascend or descend. Monsters can also be tailored to either pose a challenge combat-wise, or be a hindrance for the player's progression by making them fly and harass him. As a result, this game is not that easy to beat. Every dungeon poses a different challenge, and there's a fair bit of coordination needed to get through without losing a life. But all in all, there are relatively few sucker punches in the game, and even if you make the mistake to get hit by one, your amount of lives should cover you. The worst thing that can happen to you though is if you run out of lives. If that happens, it's simply game over and you lose all your progress. The only way around that is to go to a town and find a ghoul that gives you a password. Yeah, the game doesn't have any save states, and the only way to keep your progress was to write that password down somewhere. It's just a shame that the game slows down and the models start to shift in and out at times because there's too much stuff on the screen for the Game Boy to handle. Fortunately, this doesn't happen very often, and as soon as you blasted 1 or 2 monsters, everything turns back to normal speed, so it's fine. After you're done with your first level, you are thrown onto the overworld of the realm. Here you usually have to look for a new town or dungeon to progress the story, which is easily done because the overworld is designed in a very linear fashion. You usually visit a town where you talk to a big demon who sends you on a fetch quest into a dungeon. Once you defeated the boss of that dungeon, you get the item you need along with a power-up, and once you returned the item, the demon says, you know what? You should check out that guy up north who needs his help finding his gremlin stick. But running through the world sounds boring now, since all you do is track back and forth between villages and dungeons. And the developers must have thought the same, because there is actually a little bit of stuff you can do here. The overworld has some optional routes which lead to rewards, but none of them are substantial. The only exception to this is the essence of the soul stream, which allows you to refill your health once per life. It is absolutely possible to complete the game without it, and it's really no hassle to get this if you want to. Apart from that, there are only 2 things you can find in the overworld: vials, which are the currency of the ghoul world, and maybe the odd extra life. Which is cool, but in hindsight, totally unnecessary. See, the only thing you can buy with those vials are extra lives from some other ghouls, and that's basically it. Furthermore, your main income of vials won't come from exploring, but from fighting. While you're walking around, random encounters can happen to you. And in those battles you have to fight. It's either win or die, and because the battles are not very hard per se, you will be swimming in money and extra lives in no time. And I know that nobody likes random encounters, but from a story perspective it makes sense to have them in here. Think about it, the whole ghoul realm is under attack by the Dark Army, so it's only natural to get ambushed by a company once in a while. Also, to break up the monotony from time to time, the developers implemented interim levels. These levels act as kind of waypoints that need to be traversed forwards and backwards, and they are usually found between some villages or dungeons. I like that feature for 2 reasons. First of all, it shakes up the overworld view and it fleshes out the ghoul realm a bit by showing interesting places like the Sea of Fire, or the Cliff of Infinite Falling, which is a name I totally made up but wish was in the game. And through these levels you can get a feel of what the ghoul realm looks like and feels like outside of the dungeons. Second, these mini-levels act as natural barriers. Gargoyle's quest doesn't work with experience points. Instead, Firebrand gets stronger by beating bosses and obtaining magical items. Our little demon here has 3 stats that can be leveled up: jump, flight, and health. Firebrand can also get some new types of projectiles that have an impact on the environment. The blockbuster shot can, surprise surprise, get rid of brittle blocks, and the claw shot can stick to spikes and create a temporary layer to climb on. Story-wise, the game leans into the tried and tested formula of the chosen one. Apparently, Firebrand is a reincarnation of a big hero called the Red Blaze, who was responsible for the inferno that saved the Ghoul realm hundreds of years ago. The resemblance even astonishes the Dark Army leader, who offers you to rule with him, side by side. And you can actually take this offer, only to be betrayed right after being stripped of all your powers, and just to add insult to injury, you still have to fight the end boss in your level 1 form. Needless to say, this is a fight you cannot win. But the game just wants you to know how stupid you are for trusting something that is even worse than the literal demon you control. And that's it. That's the whole game, and I gotta say, it still holds up to this day. The first part of this series impresses with well thought out gameplay ideas, good visuals as far as it's possible for the Game Boy, and pinpoint controls that make platforming super fun. Gargoyle's Quest sold surprisingly well, and one of the big reasons for its success was that it was a hybrid between a platformer, an adventure, and an RPG, which was a straight up novelty at the time. And the fact that the design team did an excellent job at blending these genres together made the game an instant darling for many. And of course Capcom ordered a sequel. Gargoyle's Quest 2: The Demon Darkness was released in 1992. And that was sadly near the end of the NES lifecycle, and you know what that means. The Super Nintendo was released just 2 years prior, and of course everyone, including me, wanted a piece of this new hype technology. Lots of developers jumped on the bandwagon and preferred to make games for the new system, which in turn pushed all the games the NES put out at the time into the background. Among them, Gargoyle's Quest 2, which understandably wasn't able to repeat the success of the original. But in all honesty, you didn't miss anything. Gameplay-wise, the sequel is almost a carbon copy of the original, with the main difference being that the levels are different, of course, and there is one more shot type in the form of a tornado. The tornado acted as a temporary platform and could propel Firebrand to places that were neither reachable with the climb nor with the claw. Now, this addition to the core gameplay right here is very important. Please keep it in mind because I will come back to this later. But apart from that, it's basically the same game with very few minor improvements. For instance, the beginning is so much better. Firebrand isn't just some gargoyle, he's a young warrior from the town of Etruria. And before the Dark Army invades you, you get an actual tutorial level that lets you find out the hovering and climbing mechanics in peace. I know that isn't much, but they made at least the effort to flesh out the character a little bit more. Plus, the game tried to pull a Dark Link from Zelda too. One of the bosses is a mirror monster that imitates Firebrand, which in my opinion is the hardest boss fight in the whole game. Also, there's one thing that seems to be less prominent, and I don't think the game is better off without it. The atmosphere doesn't feel as macabre as in the first game. Some dungeons in the original had some really spooky monsters and environments with flesh for walls and weird tile work in general. And I don't know what happened, but Gargoyle's Quest 2 looks a bit more sterile than its counterpart. More colorful, yes, because of the NES, but also less spooky and more kid-friendly, so to speak. This is even represented in the music. The first title had way more dark music tracks, and the sequel goes more for the upbeat direction. Not convinced yet? Well, then I invite you to take a look at the actual ad for the game that was broadcast in Japan at the time. Capcom. Now, is Gargoyle's Quest 2 still a great game? Oh yes, it is. But if I had to decide, I would go for the Game Boy version any day. True, the story is even less convincing, but it makes up for that by showing more style and character than the sequel. The overall design is more spooky to me, and of course I go for stuff like that. And this is probably one of the reasons why I like the third installment in the series just as well. The Super Nintendo made it possible to breathe actual life into the Ghoul realm. And this time around we even have different environments to prove that the Ghoul realm is just so far removed from the human world. It doesn't matter if you are in a jungle, a castle, or a damp cave, thanks to the chosen colors, usually held dark, everything looks broody, macabre, and a little twisted. So in short, the atmosphere is just breathtaking. And not to say that the enemy design in the other games was bad, but in here you're able to see all kinds of weird creatures, wind snakes with faces, symbiotic crab demons, and of course the most evil of them all, demon clowns. And Firebrand is definitely a case of watch out who you call ugly in middle school. My little tubby homeboy here grew into a lean, menacing demon with claws, and he will rip your head off. Water. I need some water. Vegeta, cover for me, please.
Oh my god, he's so goddamn cool!
Yes he is. But this time, Firebrand is not fighting an invading army, he is fighting his own kin. This game's story revolves around the crests, 6 magical stones which preside over their respective elements. When all crests are combined, the Crest of Infinity will appear, bestowing its holder with untold power and the ability to conquer all realms. And ever since these crests appeared, the denizens of the Ghoul realm started to fight against each other because everyone wants to be more powerful and fulfill their wishes. Firebrand included, who almost managed to get the complete set before the game even started. Well, at least until he got hijacked mid-air and robbed of all his stones by a demon named Phalanx. Phalanx goes ahead to rule the demon world, while an obviously pissed Firebrand swears revenge. And right here I noticed something that I don't like. See, this part of the story is in the cutscenes right before the game starts. But as soon as you click the start button, you are thrown right into the action where you have to face off against a massive zombie dragon. I gotta admit, it makes for a bombastic entrance, but why the hell are we fighting this beast? Well, there is a part of the story that is never explained in game, and not even in the manual. Yes, games would usually come with a manual back then, but again, I had to search on the internet for the rest of the story and God knows where that originated from. So here's the really short version. Phalanx makes himself a king, tries to summon the ultimate crest, but fails because the Crest of Fire was chipped in the fight against Firebrand, who holds the last piece. The failed ritual makes the Fire Crest explode, which douses the world in flames, and because King Phalanx needs a scapegoat now, he puts the blame on Firebrand. Firebrand gets imprisoned in the Colosseum, where he is able to break out from, and is now on his way to regather the crests and kick Phalanx's ass. Now usually I would say this is a minor nitpick, because who gives a damn about the story in a non-RPG? But there are certain things in this game that need to be explained. For example, if Firebrand is so noble, why is he killing his own people? Well, because he has to, there you go. And who the hell is this Arma guy that shows up every now and then and wants to fight? Yeah, that is Phalanx's general and he wants to fight you personally. See, never explained, I had to do it for you. And I know that you don't want a long-ass backstory at the beginning of the game, so here's a potential fix. Why not give us a little bit of backstory every time we pick up one of those crests? Or a piece of the Fire Crest, which we also have to glue together. That way you can split the story up, and you would give people even more incentive to look for all the stuff. How's that sound? In conclusion, yes, the story's here, and it's not that bad actually, but the execution sucks. Which, I am sorry to say, is also true for the gameplay. The game is still a side-scroller with mild RPG elements, but Demon's Crest is a wildly different game when compared to Gargoyle's Quest 1 and 2. The game ditched the linear progression of its ancestors and instead opens up the whole world to Firebrand once he cleared the first level. There are 6 levels in total, which can be visited in any order you want and as many times as you want. And you should, because it is impossible to find everything the levels have to offer during your first visit. Every level has a main path you can take that requires no special powers, but on closer inspection you might find a suspicious wall of blocks or a body of water you might want to look at. And here is where the crests come in. Every stone you find changes Firebrand into another beast with different abilities. The Crest of Air lets Firebrand fly truly high into the sky. The Water Crest turns him into a deep-sea creature, and so on and on. And with these crests, the levels open up dramatically. Suddenly you find a path that makes the level double in size, and there's another boss waiting for you and more goodies for you to find. In addition to the crests, you can also find empty vials and scrolls in the world, which you can fill with several potions or spells respectively. Also, there are 6 unique talismans to get, which grant a nice little boost to your stats or can force enemies to drop more money and health. And you would think that a game like this would be a blast with all the stuff you can find, right? Well, actually, no. Sometimes it's even quite boring, so why is that? Now, to answer this question, we need to go back to the previous games and have a look at the levels. See, the levels in Gargoyle's Quest were designed around 2 and only 2 abilities: climbing and hovering. And of course the level design needs to reflect that. So you build a level where you actually need to climb and jump your way through. Having a dash sequence in there a la Sonic the Hedgehog would be stupid because Firebrand doesn't have a run ability. Makes sense so far, right? Okay, now 2 mechanics doesn't sound like much, but there is a point to be made that limitations are the driving force of creativity. Because you only have those 2 mechanics, you can really dig into the concept and think about what kind of scenarios lend themselves to this. And boom baby, you get the levels from Gargoyle's Quest. Maze-like dungeons where you go up and down, where you have to tread carefully because there are spikes and enemies everywhere. And better yet, you can make the levels even harder later on because the player learns how to use these mechanics in the most effective way, and then you can challenge him again. And that's what the second game did with the Whirlwind power-up. This little tornado made it possible to implement one more obstacle into the jump and climb formula: bottlenecks. Before this upgrade, Firebrand had no way to get through this. He cannot truly fly, so that's out. The claw is just useful on spikes to create a safe haven on a wall, so the only option the player has is to use the tornado. The point is, every upgrade you find in these games complement the overall level design that is already here. These are additions to an already well-established idea. But Demon's Crest has multiple ideas that all need to be in the game, and as such, all fight for the player's attention, and the level design of course has to follow suit. As a result, almost all of the levels needed to be simplified and stretched in order to make room for spots where you can use all of the other abilities you get from the crests. But that meant getting rid of the maze-like quality the predecessors had. Gone is the verticality I adored so much, and with it the wall spikes and the precision jumps you needed to master. Instead, we get simple side-scrolling levels that feature obvious spots to use your newfound abilities. And I have nothing against this kind of level design, but it doesn't work with Demon's Crest because of Firebrand's ability to hover over obstacles. Which, by the way, he can do for forever now. Seriously, I get to a high enough position and I can just skip the whole level and fly straight to the boss if I want to. The terrain still has some platforms and spikes that you could fall into, but it is literally impossible to screw up because you can just fly over these obstacles in the first place. Not even the monsters matter because almost all of them are bound to the floor. As soon as I realized that I can just not fight, the game became super easy to beat because the only real challenges the game had left were the bosses. Not the levels or the monsters within, just the bosses. This is the core problem right here. The mechanics you have in this game are either used poorly or for the obvious purpose, and even then, only now and then. There is a fix to this problem too. Either you make a game that is incredibly big so every mechanic can get its turn to truly shine and be used in creative ways, or you ditch some of those mechanics and focus on less, which brings you back to the earlier titles. What you have in Demon's Crest is not a test of skill, it's a collectathon because the game wants to show you all the stuff it has. And I can actually back my claim up. There are 4 different endings to this game, and the ending you get is highly dependent on how much stuff you actually found before you go to the last level. And not to say that this is bad, I like games like that too. Banjo-Kazooie, for example, is a wonderful example for a collectathon game that is truly fun to play. But the level design in Demon's Crest made it clear that it couldn't decide whether it wanted to be a skill game or a collection game, and because of this, the game is just okay when it could have been great. So if this game is just good but not great, why the hype now? Why does a mint condition, still sealed copy cost about $2,500? Especially when this title got completely overlooked during its release? Well, in 2 words? Timing and competition. This game was released in 1994, the same year the PlayStation made its great debut. So we have the same problem we had with Gargoyle's Quest. Everybody was getting ready to switch consoles again. In addition to that, Demon's Crest had its competition set in its own house as well. Even though 1994 was the year the Super NES started to get irrelevant, it was far from done. That year alone blessed us with gems such as Donkey Kong Country, Doom 2, Earthbound, Super Metroid, Final Fantasy VI, Mega Man X2. And for the non-Nintendo boys, we have the first Warcraft title. So as a little kid in the 90s, when a video game costs about $60, which would be $105 today, well, you would have to be very picky, because the only time you would get a video game was your birthday and maybe Christmas. And I can't help but think that there is one more reason why Demon's Crest got overlooked. Willfully this time. It could be the fact that these lovely American Christian households didn't want to invite Satan incarnate into their homes. Just saying. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the complete history of the Gargoyle's Quest trilogy. One experimental and highly successful title, one worthy successor with minor improvements, and the super attractive black sheep that vowed to turn the established tradition around with all its might, but didn't succeed. So dear viewer, let me ask you, how cool would it be to get a remake of this franchise now that everybody warmed up to the idea of being the anti-hero? To the idea that light is not necessarily good? How about a Demon's Crest with the atmosphere from number 3, the well thought out level design from number 1, and that one mirror boss fight from number 2? I would raise hell for that, and I mean, I already did it. Look at my army I got ready for Halloween, but here's the thing, I would do it again. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this Halloween special, and please, don't be afraid of the monsters you see this Hallows Eve. Just embrace your dark side. Just for one night. Trust me, it's fun.